The ye shall not surely die, once saved, always saved, objection. So what I mean by this is the people who don't believe in OSAS, once saved, always saved, the no-sassers, the Arminians, they say once saved, always saved is Satan saying, ye shall not surely die, like back in the Garden of Eden. So here's just one comment. This isn't the first and it won't be the last that brings this argument. Once saved, always saved is same as go ahead, eat, you won't surely die, doctrine of demons. And also, lots of people call once saved, always saved a doctrine of demons, but this shouldn't surprise us because the Bible tells us that the way of truth will be evil spoken of. We see this in 2 Peter chapter 2, starting verse 1. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. And many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. Now, it's not just once saved, always saved that's evil spoken of. People call believing on Jesus, how to be saved, easy believism. They call the true grace of God cheap grace or hyper grace. The true grace of God allows you to live however you want and still go to heaven. And people don't like that truth because they think it promotes sinfulness. So they call it cheap grace, and they call true salvation easy believism. And of course, it's easy believism. It's easy to be saved. Denying that fact means you're working for your salvation. So those terms are used by people who speak evil of the truth, as the Bible predicted. But anyway, here's another comment. It's actually from the same guy, James Miller. What he is saying, and by he means me, what he is saying is same thing serpent said, you will not surely die. Same lie, just worded differently. Now I'll stop there. There's dozens of things wrong with this comment, verses taken out of context and whatnot. But the point is to show you how people use the argument that once saved, always saved is the same as Satan saying, ye shall not surely die. Once saved, always saved. You won't go to hell for any reason as a believer. Ye shall not surely die. At surface level, it looks like a valid argument. But if we dig deeper, those who believe you can lose your salvation are ironically actually listening to Satan, exactly like Adam and Eve. Let's look at some verses. Genesis chapter 2, verse 17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. So this is God talking. If they eat of the tree, they will die. Okay, now let's look at what Satan says. Starting Genesis chapter 3, starting verse 1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God had said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. Alright, so there's two things Satan does here. He makes them question God, and he says the opposite of what God has said. What did God say? They will die. What did Satan say? They won't die. Satan goes against what God says. He says the opposite. Okay, now fast forward to Jesus. We're out of the Garden of Eden. We've been out of the garden for thousands of years. Let's look at what Jesus said. John chapter 6, verse 47. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me hath everlasting life. Jesus says, he that believes on him one time has everlasting life. What's Satan do? Well, he makes you question God, and he says the opposite of what God has said. When it comes to this verse, Satan makes you question God. He says, Yea, hath God said, he that believes on Jesus hath everlasting life? And Satan says the opposite of what God has said. Instead of saying you have everlasting life, he says you have temporary life, a life that ends. like what these Arminians believe. Your everlasting life can come to an end. Alright, so check what else Jesus has said. John chapter 11, starting verse 25. Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? What's Jesus say? He that believes on him will never die. What's Satan say? He makes you question God, and he says the opposite. Did Jesus really say only believe? You will surely die if you only believe. Alright, now here's another verse. John chapter 6, verse 35. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. What's Jesus say? He who believes in him shall never hunger, shall never thirst. Okay, now what does Satan say? Like in the Garden of Eden, again, he makes you question God, and he says the opposite of what God said. Jesus says believers will never die. Satan says you will die. Satan looks at these verses and says that's not true. You will die. You will hunger. You will thirst. Arminians are listening to Satan like Adam and Eve. Satan today says, Yea, hath God said, he that believes in him hath everlasting life, promoting a works-based salvation. And Satan today says, Thou shalt surely die, even if you believe in Jesus, promoting the Arminian heresy. He makes you question Jesus, and he says the opposite of what Jesus says. Arminians are letting Satan make them question God, and they are believing Satan's lie that goes the opposite of what Jesus has said, that believers will never die. And if you think about it, what is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? What does it represent? It represents the law. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. What's good? Well, it's the law. Romans chapter 7, verse 12. Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy, and just, and good. The law is also the knowledge of sin. The law is the knowledge of evil. Romans chapter 3, verse 20. Therefore, by the deeds of the law shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. So that's what the tree of knowledge of good and evil represents. It's the law. You could also say that Satan hasn't changed when it comes to damning people. He makes people work for their salvation, making them eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, aka the law. And he lies to them, saying that they won't surely die for working for their salvation. You must work for your salvation to not go to hell. It's the same lie that Satan told them in the garden. Thou shalt not surely die. These Arminians need to eat of the tree of life, which represents Jesus, and to live forever. Let's see a verse in Genesis chapter 3, verse 22. And the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. So Jesus is the tree of life. We see a comparison in John chapter 6, verse 51. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. We see another verse in John chapter 6, verse 58. This is that bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers did eat manna and are dead. He that eateth of this bread shall live forever. So, in conclusion, Arminians are eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. They're working for their salvation. And Arminians are working. They are working for their salvation. I mean, if you believe you can lose salvation, you would have to be working for your salvation. Arminians believe they can lose salvation because of some sin, whether it be the sin of unbelief or some other sin. So therefore you must turn from sin to not lose salvation. That's work salvation, any way you slice it. So Arminians are eating of the tree of good and evil, and they're letting Satan make them question Jesus when he says to just believe in him to have everlasting life. And Satan is making them believe the opposite of what Jesus has said. Instead of believing in everlasting life, they believe in a life that ends, just like back in the Garden of Eden. Nothing has changed. That's all I have for now. The ye shall not surely die, once saved, always saved, objection. I also forgot to mention, since the tree of knowledge of good and evil is the law, right? God literally tells Adam and Eve that they will die. In other words, they will die and go to hell if they follow the law. Kind of what us free gracers are doing. We tell everyone who's working for their salvation that they're going to die and go straight to hell. Again, nothing has changed.